What's up? Today we're here with Sync Titan Jim Dooley. He's got tens of thousands of placements. We're talking about mindset. We're talking about his time with Hans Zimmer and what he learned from that experience, how he's applied it for his lengthy career. He's currently the composer on the show Walker. We're going to discuss his DAW templates, how he has things set up. It's going to be an awesome conversation. Check it out.
Awesome, Jim. Thank you so much for hanging out with us and speaking with us today. Before we dive into what we're going to talk about, can you just give our listeners a short little backstory on where you started and where you ended up?
The short story is I did my undergrad at NYU, graduate at USC in their film scoring program. I ended up working with Hans Zimmer as his technical assistant, starting with the movie Gladiator, finishing with the movie Riding in Cars with Boys as a 2-year tenure, and then working as an additional music composer, doing my own thing for the next 16 years after that at Hans's facility down in Santa Monica, formerly Media Ventures, then Remote Control Productions. And during this time, I've had my share of successes with him on his movies, writing for movies like The Da Vinci Code and Pirates of the Caribbean movies, and then also having my own successes with winning, for example, Primetime Emmy for Best Score for Pushing Daisies in 2008.
Now, your story is really interesting because it started with a random meeting that you had with a friend of yours who was like just on the side of the road or got stuck or something like that.
That's true. I'll keep this as brief as possible, but if I had a unique advantage, it's that I didn't come from money, and my father is a fireman in New York City. His father was a fireman in New York City. And when you have those kinds of jobs, you're on for 3 days, off for 4 days. So everybody had 5 jobs. So I grew up thinking that this was a common occurrence. When I came out to California and I didn't have any employment, I was like, well, I'll just get like 3 or 4 jobs because that's what everybody does, right? This hustle mentality that I grew up with, this mindset that we keep talking about. The Hollywood Reporter at this time had a film and TV music issue. And in the very back of the magazine, they list everybody in town who's doing anything of note and the 4 projects or 3 or 4 projects that they are most happy with or most known for, which they get to pick. I wrote every 4 persons in the entire magazine. And out of the 100 or 200 people, I can't remember, honestly, one wrote back to me. I said, I love your music and these 3 things. I'll be your assistant for free. I worked for this guy once a week, cold calling the Hollywood Reporter for jobs for him. Driving to that road one day, I saw my friend on the side of the road. I was like, oh my God, that's Steve. And so I met Steve on the side of the road. We exchanged current information. The next week, he got the call to interview as Hans Zimmer's technical assistant. And he said, you know what? That's not for me. I'm an engineer. But you know what? I just ran into a guy who I think would be great. And so just having this mindset of, I'm going to make this happen. I'm going to put myself out there and do everything the best that I could, changed my life. It was chance, meeting, opportunity, the way that I like to think about that. And that ultimately, that got me that interview with Hans Zimmer, and the rest was history after that.
You said something really interesting that we hear a lot. You know, I sent 100 messages out and I got 1 response. And it was that 1 response that made all the difference. And it's so often that people will send 10 messages out and give up because they get no response. Having that awareness that you just, no matter what, you keep going. Let's talk about that a bit. How has that played a role for you? Like the, rejection, overcoming rejection. This is a big issue with musicians, artists.
I was not aware that it wasn't a possibility for me as a kid. I'm like, this is what I want to do with my life. And the farther you go down that road, the more no's you're going to get. No is easy. I always say no is cheap. Yes is expensive. You can work on the yes part of the equation. It's like, I want to go out to Los Angeles and become a film composer. Just the odds of that are so astronomical. But I wasn't, at the beginning, fully aware of those odds. You gradually become more aware of those as you go on. With the experience I have now, even with something like Position Music, I have 10 records with them. You put out a record, maybe 1 will hit, 3 will get half hit, and then maybe even half an album might not get used at all. But when that one thing hits, that's amazing. It's like sending out those letters. I'm sending music out into the world. The world will tell you what they like. It's not up to me to tell anybody what they like of mine. They will let me know. And so you just have to keep believing that it can be possible. And if I have an opportunity or an idea, I'm going to do it. Actually, even Google has this amazing thing, which I feel like correlates a lot to what we're doing, which is the idea can move forward until somebody proves it's not possible. So somebody says, oh, we have an idea. We're going to do internet via weather balloons around the world. It's like, that's ridiculous. But we don't know that it's wrong yet. So let's go down that road until we find out that it's not possible. And so I'm always trying to find these new ways until like someone tells me it's not a good idea. Some ideas were, for example, coming up with American anthems and doing them in trailer versions, the Battle Hymn of the Republic or Star Spangled Banner in trailer form. And people are like, who's going to want this? It's like, turns out quite a number of people, but in the beginning, it didn't seem like a good idea until it was proven that it worked. So
I was going to say a big part of it is just thinking outside the box. If people tell you that it's hard or you can't do it, then that's the avenue really that you should go down, because very few people are doing that. So much of your story resonates with me because I grew up in a similar situation. My grandfather was actually a fireman. It's funny, not a lot of people know this, only my close friends, but when I first got out of high school, I was a volunteer fireman. But you have the multiple jobs, and then I just had no idea that it was not possible. Why not go after it? And yeah, people are going to tell you that it's hard. You know, if you believe in yourself and you look and you see other people doing it, like I would always look at the other people who are doing it and be like, well, if that person can do it, why can't I do it? It doesn't make any sense. If you have that mindset, if other people are doing it, other people are accomplishing it, then of course it's accomplishable.
that's true. And you know what? I was talking with my wife the other day. She said, how's it going? I'm like, it's tough. But what I've found that with every cue that I start, I say, what can I do with this one cue that can make this the best thing that I've ever made, that this could ever be? Even if it's a small cue, I'm like, what can I do? What's the challenge to myself? I have to challenge myself. I have to challenge them. But this mindset, instead of going, I have enough experience, you go, blah, 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 no one's going to notice. It's like, of course they're going to notice. It's like you can choose to put everything you have into it from the beginning when you have less knowledge about how difficult it may be. And then even to later in life when you actually understand it a bit more.
There might be some people watching, likely there are people watching who are aspiring film composers. What would you tell your younger self when you were at USC or thinking about going to USC with that you wish you had known then?
I say this to countless amounts of younger professionals, I should say. Find someone that's doing it at a high level and then make yourself indispensable to that person. When I finished USC, I said, give me Star Wars. I'm ready. Let's do that. And then you spent 15 minutes watching Hans Zimmer write, and you're like, I know nothing. The difference between the amateur and the professional is so vast that you're unaware of what you don't know. And I always equate, I do lots of metaphors with cooking. And so the difference of cooking at home for a family of 4 or 6, 8 every night, that's difficult. Doing 300 or 500 covers at a restaurant, that's the level that you're looking to be at. And that's a different league. So that's where you want to be to. It's like you may be able to do this at home, but if you want to do that next level, there is so much technique involved. It's a teachable profession. This is how you do it. The same way that you guys talk about, it's like sync data. It's like you're talking about metadata. I can teach you this information. You might not know it. You might not be aware that you don't know it. So as a film composer, you really want to see the process so that you can see the throughput from beginning to end and just all the nuances in these things. You just cannot imagine the amount of detail that goes into the entire process until you've seen it from a professional who's doing it at a high level.
As you were saying that, I immediately started thinking of, there were 2 composers who I worked with a lot. And one was Matt Messina, and the other one was a guy named David Kurtz. David was the first person that I started working with when I moved to Los Angeles. My very first session with him, playing guitar. I'm watching the scene and playing something I'm supposed to hit. And somehow I hit something weird with my finger. And I remember I just stopped playing. And I was like, well, let me grab that again. Because that's what you do when you're making records, right? You stop and you make it perfect. And I remember he came in over the talkback, firmly stated to me, don't stop playing until I tell you to stop playing. And I was like, oh, he's going to fire me. He said it very firmly. And so I did the next thing and, we wrapped up and I went into the room and I waited and I finally waited for a little while later. I had a moment and I just grabbed him and I said, David, I'm really sorry about that. And he goes, Michael, we're not making records here. We got to do 13 cues today. That's the difference between, the traditional music industry where you spend a year on 13 songs and here where you literally have 8 hours to do 13 cues written, produced, and mixed and sent out. So let's talk about templates and how you use templates in your work.
For me, for example, like before my TV season begins, I spend this last for Walker maybe about 2 months just working on my template to make sure that I could do the throughput, make it perfect, bring in any engineers to tweak my sounds, get new sounds, do a sample recording. So by the time I'm ready to begin, everything is perfectly in place, pre-bust, ready to offline bounce, that everything is perfect. And I spent months. So by the time we begin, I'm ready to go. For example, like in cooking, where if you're going to cook a steak, some people say, oh, you take the steak out of the fridge, put it in a pan. How much better can you be? It's like, wow, if you take it out ahead of time and temper the meat so that it has time to come to room temperature, this allows for more even cooking. If you put it in the refrigerator for a day, that's going to take some of the water out. That's going to allow for more even browning. There's so much technique about every little bit where music, an EQ, the right reverb, all of these things, because it's additive, that you put it all together, what we call a mix. It's the sum of your ideas and technique released out onto the world. That's really what you're putting together. So I stack the deck and I cheat, if you want to consider it that I'm not a great engineer. When I'm setting up my mix session in my template, I have engineers come in, tweak this. What would you do? How does this sound? And have everything at the ready and make it a searchable template where everything is at my fingertips.
I'm curious, do you have multiple templates for the same show?
No, actually, it's quite interesting. I go the most difficult way possible, that I have one template with every sound that I own in that template. Every time I get a sample library, it takes me about probably a full day to adapt it into my template. So what I do is I go through, obviously, I look at the material. I check the walkthrough videos. I'm like, okay, what are they doing? I want to hear what musicians have written with this thing, if it's a commercial bit, so I can see what their choices are. And then I break out the entire sample library into, I'm like, I like this, I like this, I like this. Here's the searchable version. And then when I use it in a TV show or a movie or a project, whatever that 3-letter abbreviation is for the project, then it becomes, if I use this pad a lot, then it becomes the Walker pad, that it's WOK. So then I can save it. And anything related to a project, I could type in like Epic Mickey, EM, all the Epic Mickey sounds come up, Walker, WLK, everything. If I like the sound, I put a star at the end of it. 2 stars means it's amazing. So I'm like, I need an excellent sound that I've already loved before. What were the ones that I can search everything by name where you want, like, for example, something commercial like Gravity. Gravity has rises in it and hits. But if you just have Gravity loaded as a plugin, you don't know what's inside of it. Right. So everything is broken out, Gravity hits, Gravity rises, so that I can type in rise and see every plugin that has that in it. To make it more efficient, the rises in Gravity are in 15 and 30-second increments, which takes too long to hold to a key and then hear the end of it. So those all get converted to WAV files, which are now in my media bay. And I can click through them to hear the ending, like, oh, that sounds like a jet airline. Can't use it. So I can click through them very quickly. It's all about making things the most efficient so that I can do my job the fastest. Every TV show that I do is going to be about 4 minutes a day. To meet that requirement requires everything to be absolutely perfect.
One thing I wish somebody had told me, I was lucky to have the guidance of a trailer composer, and he said, before you start, you need to make sure your computer has this much RAM, this much memory, and that's not really talked about very often. To support loading up a template that takes up a gig, what are your specs? What do you have going on?
This is very interesting because things have changed from the beginning. So let's go back to Hans Zimmer circa 2000. His template, and this is again where I got a lot of my technique from and then expanded on it. The idea was that trying to keep everything at your fingertips. So he just loaded up all the sounds that he had, which is amazing. So to do that required, like, a Roland 760 could only have, I think it was 16 megs of RAM. So they're like, this is how much sound that you could put in there. He's like, give me 18 of them then. And the emulator did only have this much RAM. Okay, then how much are you going to do with that? He's like, well, then get me, I don't know, we had 15 or 20 of them. And the Yamaha...
The O2R?
Sorry, the O2R, he's like, only had so many inputs. He's like, well, let's get 5 of them. Then we'll submix them and then to a 6th. So the idea was keeping everything live in his template. When you make a musical decision, I want to use an oboe. You just click on the oboe. It's got its reverb, EQ, it's pre-bust. You write your line. If you have to go from the creative idea, I want an oboe, let me load an oboe. Which oboe is that? By the time you've gotten through that, your creative instinct is now gone. That's how I move as fast as possible. What I do is I just everything in Cubase, which is a program I've been using for 25 years, all the tracks are disabled. So it doesn't weigh on your CPU. It's just a massive, massive file. The good news is we used to have all of this stuff, there's racks and air conditioning units, all of that is gone now. I have an M1 Max Studio, maxed out, except for the video card, because I'm not doing video editing. So 8 terabytes of hard disk space, the SSD, and then maxed out RAM. That's my computer. I do use the Apollo, the UAD interface, the Apollo 6, and I have two of the Octos. Each has 8 chips. So all of my inserts and outboard gear is running on the DSP chips. And for that, the reason for that is primarily about offline bouncing. And for people who are going to be listening want to know what offline bouncing is. When I'm done with a cue, music comes up, it's pre-bussed into food groups. So woodwinds, brass, short strings, long strings, box. It's about 17 different stems. It comes into the stems and then that's summed at the mix. So I can take my 2-mix sum, click 17 stereo stems. I can offline bounce in about the same amount of real time as the length of the cue. And when you're doing the offline bounce that way, everything is discretely bussed. Your print's going to be perfect. Everything starts at the beginning, ends at the same place. It's going to be great. And they're all pre-numbered the way that you label each group bus in a number order so that when somebody takes them into Pro Tools, for example, they order in the correct order. So all of that work, that's a long answer to how you create a template that makes it into a working condition for a show.
Yeah, and it's such valuable information. And I imagine that took a long time to systematize and set up and figure that out. But I've received Jim's stems before, and they are so well organized. What I'm gathering, if I understood what you said correctly, to export all of that, it takes you the amount of time of just playing the track through. You get all the stems printed. That's incredible. You can make changes. There's specific things there's solo buses. You need to do things that are separate, but in general, and when you're working on like the primary parts of an orchestral template, that your reverbs for your woods and brass and these kinds of things are going to be on the whole part mostly static. But you're going to want your short strings to have a little less reverb than your long strings, and all that stuff you work out ahead of time, and allows you to be fast. Would you say that it's essential for aspiring composers to learn audio engineering as well?
Yes, I would say that. I would say to learn as many things as possible. And again, go back to cooking. I was watching an interview with Gordon Ramsay, and he opened up his own restaurant. There were parts that he didn't know about. He didn't know about baking. And so he's like, I need to put me in the other parts of the restaurant that I don't know about. I need to learn them and fix this deficiency. That's a great attitude to have in this business. What do you not know, and can you fix that? And if you don't know something, ask someone. If you don't know about compression, watch a YouTube video on compression. Get a compressor, check one out. Even the most basic of any DAW is going to have a compressor that comes with it. Experiment with it. Have your brother or sister sing into a microphone, dial it up and down until it breaks. You have to go through this process of learning, and that's what it takes some time. But there's so many resources out there for this. There's no excuse to not have a fundamental understanding of all of these things. I think some people, you want to take these people into two groups. There's Hendrix. He didn't even need to read music. It's like, well, if you're Jimi Hendrix, maybe that is the truth, and if you're the greatest guitar player of all time. But for the rest of us, it's like knowing as much as you can about everything that you do is going to be beneficial of you doing your craft.
It's an incomplete statement, by the way, when it comes to Hendrix. When they say like he didn't read music, neither did Eddie Van Halen, but they had ears and they knew what their hands were doing, and they had the connection. So if you put sheet music in front of them, no. And it's irrelevant. But could Hendrix play a blues scale or a pentatonic scale? Yeah. Could Hendrix play major and minor? Yeah. Did he play diatonic? Yeah. Because if he didn't, his songs would not have been hits. They would have been a mishmash of mush.
Michael, you're 100% right. Eddie growing up and studying classical piano, how that heavily influenced his understanding of rock guitar, what made him different. Same thing with Randy Rhoads. Yeah. It's like studying classical guitar changed his thing. It's like, go back to the Doors. When you're having Robbie Krieger, okay, he studied flamenco guitar, and doing this with nails, it's like, okay, John Densmore, he studied Latin jazz. It's like everybody coming to it, Ray Manzarek studying classical piano, they bring this immense understanding of their craft and musicianship, and then the sum of those parts creates the Doors. It's like, it's not that much of an accident when you put these four talented people and you take a poet and the rest of these folks who are incredibly studied. It's not that just sat down for the first time. And I heard stories of Hendrix that he was trying to get his 10,000 hours in, if you want to count it that way, falling asleep with the guitar in his hands because he knew he had to make up. Tommy Tedesco, same thing.
And the other thing, too, is at that time, engineering was its own study because you had to go to a studio and that's the only way you could record. People make the statement, but they don't complete the statement. When you look at Eddie Van Halen, he knew tone. He created a sound completely on his own because not only did he make his own guitar, but then he also knew enough about electricity to run those tubes in his Marshall extremely hot with the attenuator. No one did that. Same thing with Hendrix and whatnot. He was the guy who put the fuzz and the octaver on the map, So it's like they did learn the skills in building their tone. Now, in our world, everything is so accessible with a laptop or a desktop computer that only costs you a couple $1,000. You can record music that ends up on TV and on the radio in your bonus room in your home. So in order to compete, you have to develop those skills just like the older folks did. Even you look back at Pete Townsend, you listen to Bob O'Reilly and stuff like that. Like he was recording that stuff, in his home studio back in the 60s and 70s with analog keyboards and plugging everything in. It's really amazing what these people who don't know how to read music did and the knowledge that they had, the technical proficiency they had beyond notes on a staff.
No, Michael, you're 100% right. I think there are people who don't want to put the effort in, who say like, oh, they also didn't put effort in. It's like, well, if all you have is a hammer, then everything's going to look like a nail. For the rest of us, quote this all the time, which is that there's no substitute for hard work. Even when I'm working on a show, I know that by the end of the season, I'm going to be better than I was at the beginning. I'm going to learn some things along the way. That's just how that goes, but you've got to put in the time. Even, for example, when I'm working on my template, you can have an assistant do that, but I have to be the one to do it. I have to see with the sound that turns me on. If it makes me want to play it and I naturally like it, then I can use that. It needs to be my perspective on the world. And so I know, again, every time I'm like, oh, buy that library, I'm like, you do that, that's an entire day of your life. Because you're going to go through every preset and find everything that you like. It's going to take a really long time. And then it becomes part of you because it's a reflection of how I look at the world.
Awesome, Jim. Hey, man, this has been a pleasure chatting with you. I always learn so much. Thank you so much for coming in and sharing with our audience. And we will be bringing you to the audience and the audience to you very soon.
Well, thank you, Michael. Thank you, Jody. Much appreciated.
If you would like to join a thriving community of elite sync professionals dedicated to ensuring each other's success in sync licensing, then Elite Music Coaching invites you to join Sync Titan.
That's right. And inside this community, you're going to have opportunities to connect directly with sync professionals like music supervisors, sync agents, and music library reps in our monthly virtual meetup and networking events. You're going to be able to get coaching directly from Jody and myself. We have listening sessions. And we also have meetups where you can connect with other collaborators all throughout the world.
Also, we post opportunities for you to submit your music to films, TV shows, trailers, commercials, video games, podcasts, web series, and more. As a Sync Titan member, you're also eligible to receive a Sync Titan award.
So make sure to click the link below or above or to the side or wherever it is on this channel so that you can learn more about Sync Titan and how you can become a valued member of this community.